October 21, 1600, Sekigahara, Japan. Filed in the aftermath of the battle that ended an age. The casualty logs from Sekigahara list numbers that don't add up. One name appears in 3 separate accounts, credited with a body count that field commanders refuse to believe. Historians who cross-referenced the surviving records found the same contradiction repeated. An entire flank of the Eastern Army stalled, not from strategy, but because one man wouldn't stop killing. His name was Torii Mototada, and the official record can't decide if he's a legend or a lie. Japan, 1600. The country had spent over a century tearing itself apart. The Sengoku period, 100 years of civil war between rival lords fighting for control of a fractured nation. By the time Tokugawa Ieyasu rose as the most powerful daimyo in Japan, one battle remained between him and total control, Sekigahara, a fight that would decide who ruled Japan for the next 250 years. Before the main battle, Ieyasu needed time. His rival, Ishida Mitsunari, commanded a coalition army closing in fast, and Ieyasu's forces weren't yet in position. He needed someone to hold a castle, Fushimi Castle, against overwhelming odds for as long as physically possible. Not to win, to buy time. He gave that assignment to Torii Mototada, a retainer who had served the Tokugawa clan for decades. Mototada accepted, knowing exactly what the order meant. Court records from the period log his response as a formality, an acceptance of certain death, filed like any other military correspondence. No hesitation is recorded anywhere in the surviving documents. The siege began in August 1600. Fushimi Castle held 1,800 defenders. The besieging army numbered somewhere between 30 and 40,000, depending on which chronicle you trust. The numbers were never independently verified, only reported after the fact by the winning side. For 10 days, the castle held. Mototada's garrison repelled wave after wave, and the siege dragged on far longer than Ishida's forces anticipated, long enough that it started disrupting the timeline of the entire war. But records from inside the siege are sparse. Most of what's known comes from besieging accounts and second-hand testimony, because almost no one on the defending side survived to file their own report. Then, on day 10, betrayal. One of Mototada's own officers, according to multiple period accounts, set fire to a tower from within, opening a breach that thousands of men had failed to force from outside. The castle's outer defenses collapsed within hours. This is where the record splits. What happened next depends entirely on which document you read. The besieging army's own accounts, the closest thing to an official version, claim the castle fell quickly once breached. Defenders overwhelmed within the day. Convenient for an army that had just spent 10 days failing to take a fortress held by a fraction of their number. But a second thread of testimony, passed down through Tokugawa retainer accounts and later compiled into domain records, tells a different story. It claims that once the outer walls fell, Mototada didn't retreat to negotiate or fall on his sword in the keep. He and a shrinking core of his remaining men fought room to room, corridor to corridor, refusing every offer of surrender relayed to them. One account, unverified but repeated across multiple later compilations, claims Mototada himself, already wounded, held a corridor alone long enough for the wounded among his men to be moved deeper into the keep. No official document confirms a body count for that stand specifically. What survives are casualty estimates for the siege's final day that are disproportionately high relative to every other day combined, a spike no military historian has fully explained. The coroner's math, if you can call it that, doesn't close cleanly. Investigators of the period, if you can call chroniclers working for a new, victorious government investigators, had every incentive to inflate the story. Mototada's sacrifice became useful almost immediately. Ieyasu won at Sekigahara 10 days later. The delay Mototada bought is credited in Tokugawa-era chronicles as decisive to that victory. A dead loyalist who held the line to the last man is exactly the kind of story a new dynasty wants circulating. So the contradiction investigators keep running into is this. Was Mototada's final stand truly as costly as later accounts claim, or was it rewritten, inflated by a government that needed a martyr to justify the deaths of 1,800 men who bought Ieyasu 10 days he barely used? No contemporary independent account exists to settle it. Every surviving record was filed, copied, or commissioned under a government built by the man Mototada died for. Here's where the story turns. Buried in a later domain record, not the famous chronicles, but an internal Tokugawa retainer ledger rediscovered centuries later, is a detail excluded from the popular version entirely. Mototada had been offered escape, twice. Not by the enemy, by his own allies, in the days before the siege even began. Ieyasu himself, according to this ledger, gave him an opening to withdraw before Fushimi was ever surrounded. Mototada refused both times. Not out of desperation, he had days to leave and chose to stay before a single enemy soldier arrived. The second detail is worse. The ledger claims Mototada wrote a farewell letter to his son before the siege began, not after, not during, but before the enemy army had even been sighted. He knew the ending before the story started. Every act of resistance that followed wasn't defiance in the moment. It was a decision made in advance, then carried out to the letter, days after he'd already said goodbye. Whatever happened in that final corridor, one thing survives every conflicting account. Torii Mototada bought Tokugawa Ieyasu 10 days. Ieyasu won Sekigahara and, through it, all of Japan. The castle was never rebuilt on the same site. What remains, according to some accounts, is a floor stained beyond restoration, left in place, unrepaired, in a nearby temple ceiling, as a record no chronicler could rewrite.